The unmarked car story continues to develop, and it's only I can say that only because I'm not finished working on it, and I'm thinking that I need to renew my efforts to nail the story down. And that's what you get if you are a blogger, the reader of a blog. Perhaps the leading blog in Chattanooga for the man who matters is Nooganomics.com, and it's there where I line up my analyses in detail in print, citing the statute, citing policy, citing correspondence, etc., that let us look into the doings of the good people in Nashville and even the good people in City Hall. I was talking this morning with Jeff Connor, who's an attorney. He works in an insurance company, and is when I met him this morning, he was applying for a position in another insurance company, a former prosecutor in Georgia. And I asked him, he's an attorney, and I said, well, I like asking attorneys questions. They are a unique tribe. And I said, well, what about in Georgia? Are unmarked police cars enforcing traffic statutes legal? And he said, no, they're illegal. And it came about from abuse by municipal governments and city corporations who ran police departments having speed traps. And these speed traps became so pernicious and so ugly and drew so many complaints that the General Assembly passed explicit laws prohibiting unmarked cars being used in speed traps. Now, I think speed traps are still a money-making game in many towns in Georgia, but there's an explicit ban in that state. Tennessee is not quite as clear. Now, the Tennessee statute that deals with unmarked cars explicitly, there's just one, and it's I'm looking here at Tennessee Code annotated 88219. It's a passage of law, of course, with serifs on the letters, as published by the I think by Mitchie, or maybe it's LexisNexis that publishes the Tennessee Code annotated. It's only $360, by the way, for a copy. I've been asking myself, is it worth springing more than $350 to obtain a hard copy of the Tennessee Code annotated? Given the time I spend perusing that set, it's about 38 books, hardbound, green. And in this code, I'm looking here online at the free version. This is unannotated Tennessee Code without the annotations. And there's a discussion for about 5 lines, given my full width screen here, 5 lines about patrol cars and the green stripe running horizontally along the upper portion of the side of each car. Who can use that stripe, right? It's about uniform markings. And then there's a B, that's A, B. Nothing in this section shall prohibit a county sheriff's department from operating unmarked cars for undercover or other purposes. Now, that's the only use of the phrase unmarked car in the statute. And I haven't done a deep review on this point, so I'm going to just say in pencil, okay? And that's what you get when you have when you're following a blog such as mine, that you get things as they develop, right? Things often are not nailed down in ink, but we see the question, and that's okay. It's okay that when you follow David Tulis on Nooganomics.com, you don't get always the final solution. You get the question, and what the question is seeing as the answer forms itself like a cloud as we're taking substance, the cloud the size of a man's hand, right? That it finally fills the sky and pours refreshing rain on a parched countryside. That's what we want to have happen. And here's my thinking, okay? And for what it's worth, it is just sort of half-informed speculation, but there is some reason to think that I might be on the right track. Unmarked cars are illegal in Tennessee, okay? And if the statute allows unmarked cars only to sheriff's department, and then but the way it's written is very open-ended, right? For undercover and other purposes. So theoretically, Jim Hammond can run on unmarked cars enforcing traffic, that is under Title 55, but can the police department? Well, we have this other question about the general constitutionality of police departments per se under relatively recent interpretations of the application of the constitutional $50 fine rule on municipal powers, right? Municipal powers are limited severely by that rule. It's called the $50 fine rule in the Tennessee Constitution, implying that municipal corporations, cities, are civil only and do not have criminal enforcement authority, except as explicitly granted. And the grants are in the Tennessee Code under traffic. Okay, so traffic is allowed generally to be adopted by a city ordinance, the city charter, and the city ordinance by reference, and enforced. Okay, so let's just grant that. So here we have an area of the statute that's enforceable by David Roddy and his 500 strong agents of protection and safety in the police department. Well, okay, now they're running unmarked cars in Chattanooga. I know that. Now the story picked up steam earlier this year in the summer when I pulled up behind an unmarked car that had stopped a hapless Saudi Daisy resident off the dam, and it turned out that the enforcement officer was from the TVA. And so the headline is wonderfully bizarre. It's a fruity headline at Nooganomics.com. Only there, by the way, nowhere else was this story covered. Coal utility enforces traffic laws all across the state, and it's a story about mission creep, I guess, and the hubris of law enforcement, where your grant or your charter for your authority, if it's open-ended, well, you're going to enforce laws wherever they can. You might even be enforcing money laundering laws if you're a coal utility enforcement agent, right? You can end up enforcing all the wonderful laws that we have, wonderful laws across the board against the people of Tennessee and Chattanooga. So we know that that's happening, and I've seen them since. I have reports of unmarked cars enforcing statute, the travel statutes, the transportation statutes, and I've seen them on Highway 153, which I frequently travel in my private business. And so we know that it's happening. Who the agents are is not clear, but I have a report from Middle Tennessee from a man who's deeply concerned about these offenses against the liberties of the people, saying that there's a whole fleet of unmarked cars being put on the road by the state and the Department of Safety to enforce the distracted driving rules. Now, I haven't checked the distracted driving statute, but apparently if you're in commerce and you're a licensee of the state of Tennessee and you're on the public right of way, you can be stopped if you're eating a hamburger while behind the wheel. Okay, if you're using a cell phone behind the wheel and an officer, a good officer, an honest officer, sees you, he can pull you over even though you are not able to see anything about him on his vehicle that he is a police officer. All he may have are dashboard mounted lights. Now the problem, you say, okay, well, David, what's the problem? Okay, what's the big deal? What are you worried about? Well, here's the worry, and it is out of Middle Tennessee. I don't have the actual story in detail, but and I just refer to the headline, and all I have is a few lines of a few paragraphs of type on the front page of the Lawrence County Advocate, which has Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, which has at the top of the page some beautiful high school girls lined up, homecoming queen, and at the bottom of the page, woman reports men posing as officers. And as a friend of mine read the story to me, they followed a woman with flashing lights all the way to her home. Two men in the car. They got out of the car when she pulled over initially. They got out of the car. They weren't dressed like officers, and so she bolted. She just put her foot back on the gas pedal and took off. They jumped back in their car and followed her with lights flashing. And when she arrived at her house, my friend Jay Hurst told me they kept going. They did not dare to stop at her property to pull her over and try to molest her, which was evidently what was happening. That is why traffic can't be enforced against private people. Now, here the problem that we can see why there's a problem here. And even though Mike Steele, who's a regular caller of mine, complains about my interest in this topic, he says, David, don't worry about this, the commercial travel problem that you're so bent on exploring. It's a useless issue. No one will follow you. No one will do this. We only have a few Mexicans to worry about who travel freely on the public roads. and a few disgruntled people like June Griffin, who's traveling freely on the public roads of Ray County without a license, not being involved in commerce. And then you have a few hard-nosed patriots like Jay Hirsch. Don't worry about it. It's not an issue. This is so much on the margin that you just can't be devoting your time to discussing it. Mike warns me. Yet we can't. I think it's important that we do, because it's illustrative of commercial government and how you, my listener, and I, we have yielded many things to commercial government, and we have now safety and security. That's what we have. Except when commercial government wants to have a SWAT raid with flashbangs in our house because we failed to fill out a form, right? And they come 20 SWAT officers with bandoliers of ammo and pistols and taser guns and 9mm machine pistols aimed at us and our wives and our children because we have not filled out a form, right? That's what we have going on a lot. There are 80,000 SWAT raids in this country per year. 80,000 per year. Events of which there's no threat of anybody being physically injured. And so we're concerned about the good people, and we're concerned about their demonstrations. And on the public highway, here's why the driver license free traveler issue is important, because we can see there's a kind of a false narrative imposed upon all of us by the state, by commercial government. The false narrative is you cannot use the public road unless you're in commerce, right? Unless you're a licensee. However, traffic enforcement against everybody means that you have travel enforcement, traffic enforcement against women driving at night. They're not in commerce. They're just going home from the office, right? Hang on. I think Mike is on the phone. David Tulis, caller, you're live on the air. David Tulis, what's on your mind?
Methinks you're baiting me, David. I think you misrepresented Mike Steele.
Hey, Mike.
What I was saying regarding the driver's license. I like to argue the law, and that's why I almost always win in court against lawyers. These guys aren't arguing the law. They're arguing, I feel, I hope, I think, I believe, regarding travel and licenses. Now, as far as getting pulled over, that applies whether you're in commercial government or not.
You mean,
we're all commercial drivers out there. I hate to say that, but we're in the commercial military because that's the law.
Right, because we applied to be in commerce.
I argued the law.
Because we applied to be in commerce by getting driver's licenses, even though we're not in commerce, right? My listener is not in commerce, but he, huh?
You are in commerce because you have to argue the law to win. The court will give you the right answer to the wrong question. And what happens is, and it hurts everyone, you get so-called patriots to go to court that when they say, well, I don't need to have a driver's license. Now, remember, just before I get into that, if you give me 1 minute. So
I'll give you 1 minute.
The government still has no authority to pull people over randomly, or the TVA, as they do, without probable cause. And unmarked cars are unconstitutional. So we're not talking about that.
Well, how are they unconstitutional?
That's a fourth that you don't waive your Fourth Amendment rights or any Bill of Rights since you're in commerce. You don't have the authority to waive your rights. But on the issue of licensing, there's a specific way to argue this in court to win, and it primarily needs to be done under the Uniform Commercial Code. If you go to the government and get a license, get a Social Security number, or you get their vehicle, it isn't your vehicle. You don't hold the title. The state does.
Right. You have only a certificate of title, not the actual title.
And if people want to be educated on how to drive without a driver's license, registration, insurance, they can. But most people don't care, and they don't want to. And they want to be regulated. And not them, but they want the other guy to be regulated. So, and since most people make car payments, if you're making a car payment, it's going to be impossible to drive that without being in commerce.
You mean to travel in that?
So my argument is the law. If you want to argue the law, you'll win in court.
What you're saying, Mike, is this. What you're saying, let me just see if I can summarize the totality of your argument in brief. You're saying that only when a person has no SSN, no birth certificate, no car with a VIN, no car with registration with the state, no insurance, and no license, only then can that person, as a natural human being, only once he's free and clear of all these parts of the ID, can he travel by car. And if he's not free of,
it has nothing to do with the Social Security number.
Well, you just now said
the courts have said that. I'm not saying it.
Okay, well, I'm just reporting what you're saying, Mike.
Conveyance.
I'm summarizing what you're trying to say.
For your own personal use, to go from point A to point B, you have a right to do that under the common law.
Can I do that by car, Mike? Yes or no?
Magna Carta.
Mike, answer my question. Can I do that by car? Yes or no?
Now, see, now you sound like the police.
Well, come on, Mike.
Can you do that in the vehicle you're traveling in?
What if you're not in a vehicle? What if you're in a car?
It's not yours. You have an equitable interest in it.
Meaning what? Meaning not a real interest, not a concrete interest?
Well, that means, first of all, it's a VIN number. So it's the federal government has a role in this. And it's titled with the state. You don't have possession of it. And this is one of the problems with Bitcoin. The only way you can possess something is to pay for it. So if you can't pay for it, you can't own it.
So you're saying that because we have, again, you have a very high and pure analysis, and I appreciate that. And I think with your analysis, Mike, we can get to the very root of our enslavement to the good people. On the other hand, practically speaking, people who are, in fact, not in commerce, even though they may have an SSN, even though they may have a note on their car, even though they may have a tag on the back, which is makes it a commercial vehicle, they can resist claims against them by the officer who insists you're in commerce by saying, I'm not in commerce, I'm traveling privately.
Not in commerce. You have to look at the word what commerce means.
Go ahead.
We are in commerce. The words are very important. Most people are in commerce and they're drivers. So they can change their status. It's our status that affects us in court.
Well, you're making
claim of our status.
You're making the exercise of a right impossible, Mike, because we're all corrupted. We all have these contracts of adhesion which reduce our legal status.
You know what?
So we can't assert our rights then. What?
They said that 40 years prior to the revolution, and Sam Adams didn't believe in that. And for 40 years, he harassed the king. It's not impossible. We can retake this country with knowledge. But before we go as far as, I'll tell you what, the driver's license issue is going to be one of the most difficult to win in court. And until people are educated in that and want to take responsibility for having their own conveyance, it's never going to happen because the law doesn't allow it.
Uniform Commercial Code.
Well, Uniform Commercial Code is part of it, absolutely, and interstate commerce. That all plays into a role of this. If you read, I read many court decisions on this, and the court does allow for you to travel from point A to point B, and I point out the Amish, without a driver's license, without registration, without insurance,
in a buggy,
because they own that conveyance. As a matter of fact, let me tell you what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is trying to do. They're trying to get that horse and buggy licensed, registered.
Let me ask you a question, Mike. Let me ask you a question on the unmarked car argument. My analysis is not. I haven't really had a chance right now to give it all, but I think there are several reasons that it's illegal and unconstitutional. One is lack of notice. Now, when there's right near our radio station studio, there's often a kind of a speed trap in front of the Northgate Mall. There's a cop car, an interceptor cop car. But before you get there, there's a notice, a large sign that says police, speed enforcement ahead.
Right.
There you have notice. The cop car is not marked, but you have notice if you're coming up behind it to come into its view that you better slow down. Unmarked cars seem to violate that notice provision.
They not only seem to, they do.
Well, okay, go ahead.
The common law not only goes with notice, but notice. You have to notice it. That's why the sheriff wears the badge and the deputy wears the badge. First of all, we have to talk about the city police not even being lawful. That I don't know where any authority exists for the cities to even create a police department. That's
well,
the realm of the sheriff.
They can have police departments, but the question is whether they can enforce statutes other than traffic.
If you're if you want to call it law enforcement, you have to notify people. You have to wear a badge. You have to wear some sort of symbol that allows people to know who you are and what you're doing. And that dates back 1,000 years.
Okay.
So you can't just show up with unmarked cars and say, I'm a detective, and pull it out of your wallet. You have to clearly display who you are.
What about the doctrine of fright? There's another reason, because a fright, to cause someone fright is a tort. And I think a woman traveling at night, she's vulnerable to being frightened and raped and molested by someone who pretends to be in an unmarked car, pretends to be an officer by having dash lights that are flashing.
And David, this is why the local judge is more important than the Supreme Court. I told people this for years. If we can get local judges in that really understand the law, this ends. Because when someone comes before them, they say, not guilty, or I'm throwing this case out, and if you bring it before me again, Mr. Prosecutor, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. It stops right there. More important than the Supreme Court is who you elect for that local judge that can stop the tyranny right now. And that's why I was telling you that this is an issue. It can be fixed. It can be fixed. It's not a hard fix.
Mike, listen, I really appreciate your calling me. I've got to give my listeners some important messages. And this is David Tulis. We do thank you for joining us here. We are Nooga Radio 92.7 and 95.3 FM HD4. We have a lot of work to do, and this story about the unmarked cars is not complete. And I'm holding up publication until Phil Noblett gives me an interview, or I can get him on the station here. David Tulis, Nooga Radio.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM. 3, 2, 1. Chat.